When I was in graduate school at the University of Chicago, I took a class in poetry, in Wordsworth's poetry, from a professor named Norman Maclean. And he was renowned in those days as a brilliant scholar and a critic, but he was also a really noted outdoorsman. He came from the wilderness of Idaho, and he was among other things, a great fly fisherman. And he wrote a couple of very powerful books that really influenced me a lot. And it impressed me, and it taught me that you can apply what you've learned in the university, especially rigor and academic integrity and integrity of thought, to almost anything that you do in life. And in his case, he applied that to the job of writing this memoir, and he turned it into art. And it's something that I've always tried to apply myself in my journalistic career, and I found that it's very hard to live up to that standard, but it will inevitably, I think, make your work better. We traveled a great deal when I was a child, so I knew that the world was a sort of a very wide and very marvelous place. But it wasn't until I got to college that I was able to add context to those experiences, to understand things in historical terms or economic terms, and it actually helped me a great deal to sort of think of the world as not only a very wide and adventurous place, but a sort of multi-layered place that had deep history that affected people's culture. And without college, I never would have had that kind of insight, I think. I never have had a formal mentor in my career, but I've had the good luck to work with a lot of people who were better than I am, people who are my own peers. And particularly when I started my career in Alaska, I worked with a guy who became my journalistic conscience in a lot of ways. He was, whenever we did a story, and he was in many cases my editor. His name is Steve Heimel, and he recently retired as a journalist in Alaska. But he was there to remind me that you need to question things more deeply. You need to be a tougher questioner, a tougher interviewer. We often had a very prickly and uncomfortable relationship, but it did me a lot of good, and I would recommend to everyone, always try to surround yourself with people who are better than you and emulate them. I think it's really important, and for very selfish reasons. For one thing, when you become a mentor, you have to explain yourself. You have to formulate principles for yourself. Most of us spend our careers doing the work and solving the problems that our workplace is in front of us. And we often don't take time out to look around and think, well, what did that really mean? What was that solution really about? So if you're seriously trying to mentor someone else and sort of guide them and and present them with the fruits of your own experience, you have to think about those kinds of things. And I think that that's extremely valuable for anyone. The sort of broader reason, though, that higher education is important is, we need to train ourselves to think. We need to train ourselves to assess information in our world in a logical way. I've been a journalist all my career, but I don't think that I can teach young people how to do the journalism of the future. But I think what's important is that they be trained as thinkers themselves, who can invent the journalism of the future themselves.